Right, I think we'll make a start. So, hi everyone. Thank you very much for coming here on the last day of UKREiiF 2025. The 11:45 slot on the Thursday. Don't anyone ever tell you it's the graveyard slot? My name's Tom. I'm the host of Pagabo Live, which is a knowledge series that encompasses webinars, online content, and in-person events such as this. So we've got a little round table here today, which is going to be really, really, really interesting. We're talking about protecting investments, talk about the strategies to reduce delays and costs. So we're going to cover some of the most common causes of delays, the role of the different areas of the built environment ecosystem play in negating supply chain disruptions, labour shortages, and regulatory hurdles. I'm going to try and look at it all through the lens of procurement as well, being in the Pagabo Live tent as we are. We've got a very, very stacked table today. So we'll go around, just do quick introductions for everybody here, starting with Karen on my left.
Sick of these microphones today. Thank you. I'm Karen Carter, the Director for National Delivery at Pagabo. So essentially supporting public sector clients to procure through our frameworks, trying not to delay their projects, trying to find the right strategies and procurement routes to get projects moving.
Hello, so I'm Jane Jeffries, Director of New Business for Willmott Dixon. So we're a Tier 1 contractor and I'm predominantly based in the South region.
Morning everyone, my name is Charley Wainwright. I am the Sales Manager for Sypro, which is part of the Pagabo Group. So we are a contract management software, so getting involved with delays and how we manage them is bread and butter for us.
Hi there, I'm Tim Harris from JLL. I'm head of the South West and Wales region, but also probably more importantly here, I'm a project manager by trade, specialising in student accommodation and universities.
Thank you. Passing the baton on there. Hello, thank you for the invite. So I'm David Rowsell, Managing Director for Kier Construction for the London and Thames Valley region, and it's great to be here today. Thank you.
I've got my own microphone. I feel standoffish.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's a perfectly good microphone. Hi everyone, I'm Ben Wilson. I'm Divisional Director for Development and Regeneration at Glasgow City Council. So I cover planning, housing, building standards, city centre and regeneration. So my role covers both people that are looking to take projects through, particularly in terms of our housing programme with our RSL partners, our housing association partners, but also two of the regulatory services which can at times maybe be the cause of some of the delays in terms of getting through to completion. So I've got a role to cover both of those sides of the transaction.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your introductions. Let's get right down to it. We've got a lot to try and fit into around 45 minutes here. So we'll push one over to you, Tim, to start off with here. Project manager by trade, as you say. What are those most common root causes of delays in public sector projects? How can they be anticipated early?
Root cause, we draw the programme wrong from day one. There's always a client aspiration for a goal and end date. We've got to try and fit in an incredible amount into that. We do take data from historic projects and real time as to how they're being delivered. But the beauty of our industry, as we all know, every project is unique. We're not the motor industry. We're a house building. We're building, hybrid buildings every time. So when we start to look at programs, we're looking at historic stuff, but timescales get reduced, approval periods get longer. We've got the added burden now of elongating out if it's high rise. You've got the Building Safety Act and the gateways to get through, so that can push you right out. There's never enough time for planning. It'd be great to get planning to be actually locked into the true date, but all these things stall us. And then, honestly, we sort of get to pushing a tender out the door, and it's never enough time for the market to really, truly absorb it. So some of the stuff we actually delve into more, and I've done this for years, is talking to the market, listening, what are the timelines you need, and where does this sit in your time frames to be able to actually do it? Because there's no point in squeezing the market, because that's where risk gets priced in and things go wrong. So, there's a lot we can do, and we put in float here, there, and everywhere for each of the early stages of design. But we get to an ROBI stage, client signs it off. What do you know? It's over budget. We've got to scale it back and then go again. So all this adds a lot of time. So we do quite a lot of dynamic cost management in the early stages, just to ensure that we're on track, But the main thing for us is to think and operate as a team with that common vision to get to that end and the product for the client. My view would be we bring the contractors in a lot earlier. I'd love to do more of that, but it's quite painful when public sector, they want 3-4 contractors pricing it. So you've got to do it 3-4 people, to be fair.
We've got 2 contractors around the table, and I can see them both nodding along really.
I'm getting evils.
Aggressively at this stage. So David, you seem to be agreeing quite heavily with that.
Yes, mostly. No. No, it's a really. I mean, when I kindly got the invite to join you today, and I saw we had 45 minutes to discuss how we reduce delays on projects, I wondered if we need an extension of time to 4.5 days to discuss it. But there's so much in what you've just said, Tim, that we can unpack. But I think a key point there is about early transparency and visibility. I know it'd be the same from Jane's perspective. The best clients, the most informed, intelligent clients we work with are the ones who warm up the supply chain, warm up the main contractors. We can in turn warm up our supply chain and give as much visibility as possible. It's well documented challenge with the skill shortage at the moment. It's only going to work. It's only going to worsen for us, and that's a conversation for another day. But the smarter clients, the more proactive clients are the ones who will give that visibility, even if it is a competitive tender of 4 or 5 contractors. Then give the early visibility to the 4 or 5 contractors, however it's being procured, ideally via Pagabo. But having that early visibility as much as possible isn't going against the grain of public procurement. It's actually intelligent. We in turn can warm our supply chain up to make sure that we've got the resources available in our specialist supply chain. So the early visibility, there's so many silver bullets I'm sure we will go through today, but that one I definitely agree with in terms of early transparency, early engagement, and to warm the supply chain up. Yeah.
Jane, sound familiar?
Yes, absolutely familiar. We welcome any kind of early contractor involvement for exactly that reason, be it we can give early cost advice, which can save, if we're talking about kind of causes of delays, then often having to revisit designs to marry up with budgets is probably one of the most common, and it's wasted time. It's kind of frustrating for people, isn't it? Because either they need to go back and find more money, or we need to change the design. So that early contractor involvement, they can often have very good advice from their PMs and QSs that they're working with, but they don't necessarily have the turnout data from a very similar building 3 months hence that we can share and we can inform. So when we see it working well, and we've done a project recently where actually they ran a mini competition for somebody to do some ECI work, it's still going to come out to tender, that's fine. It's still going to go out to kind of 4 contractors afterwards, but it means that we can help inform, be it sustainability, program, logistics, budgets, at an early stage, and they have a much more informed tender that goes out, which means the quality of what they get back will help as well. So that will, you can't talk to a contractor early enough, in our view. I'd say exactly as David said.
So how then, bringing you into this one here, Karen, how then can the procurement process help in being flexible to do that?
Yeah, I think everything that was just been mentioned there is exactly what we would want to see happening, really. A lot of our client engagement, one of the main frustrations from a procurement perspective is we want to be there early. We want to facilitate, ultimately we're there to facilitate that connection between client, consultant, contractor, to get the right people around the table. It is often the biggest struggle that we find in that is that sort of reluctance through compliance usually to engage. There's this inherent belief that we need to come to market with a solid specification. We know exactly what we want. These are the timescales. This is our budget. We know what we're doing from a client perspective, which would be great, but we don't really need to do that. We can harness all of that innovation. We can harness all of this expertise from our supply chains. Procurement should be seen as supply chain. It's not, the two can't exist without each other. So the earlier that procurement is involved with that in defining the procurement strategy, that should be in a way with our supply chain partners, not in isolation. So a lot of the time, obviously with a Pagabo frameworks, for example, which you kindly brought into the conversation, which is very good. A lot of the way that we talk to clients who we're procuring with is encouraging that early contractor involvement, but you're in a protected bubble through a framework. Ultimately you've got a building to build. You've chosen to use a framework. These people and these contractors, these organisations, ultimately one of them will be your build partner. So let's engage. You're not doing anything wrong. You don't have to be talking to everyone in the market. That's the power of a framework. That's how you can really harness the expertise within that, which we've pre-vetted. You're there for a reason. Let's use that. Let's use that protected bubble to really get a procurement strategy that works, that you don't have to revisit later down the line. Let's get it right first time, or second at least.
Yes, can we get a local authority view on this from you, Ben, actually, because you've been very
Sure.
quietly waiting.
Yes, so the conversation's focused on procurement right the way through, but in that, what I'm interested in is how can the bits like getting planning, how can that be designed so that it fits within the wider points that's been discussed? So, do you view the planning system as this black box into which you put an input and then stuff happens, but you can't see what it is, and then an output comes, and when it comes and what it is uncertain? And is that aspect of it a particular factor when it comes to the overall project timeline and allowing more time than perhaps you would want? Now, that's a question I'll just sort of leave hanging there. And also the point there about have you ever been involved in a project where there was a design and a specification and a vision worked out in order to get planning permission, but then when it comes to the stage of bringing the contractor on board, that has to get revisited, and in some cases some of the points that are getting revisited are actually biggies for the planners, and that then leads to, well, you're getting not two for the price of one. You're having to go back into the planning process, and then that adds another whole 12 months or whatever. So 2 questions I'm going to leave hanging for my panel members there. But by setting that out, what can we do both as public sector, local authorities, with a key role in this as regulators, and yourselves as that whole chain? How can we approach this to have shorter, snappier black box episodes for the planning system, which helps fit the whole procurement chain that you're describing? And what would that? How might we achieve that? And how would you change what you put into the planning process in order to achieve that? So I'm not giving you answers, I'm giving you questions, I'm afraid.
So that's kind of how our round table works, to be fair. We're supposed to all be asking the questions here. So does anyone want to jump in on Ben's point there and respond?
Yeah, I'll come back on a couple of points. When we've done a lot of fast track projects, the planning process is overlapped with either design stage, you're still doing detailed design, or you're out to the market with it. And the number of times I've tried to persuade contractors, look, we haven't got planning yet, but it's going to come. That's the trigger. That will make the job happen, but we're going to dovetail it. That all depends on your relationship with the local authority and how far you've got with it. And is it going to sail through, or is it going to go into committee and it's going to be a bit of a dogfight? But you're dead right when we talk about, we might get a tender return back that unfortunately the cost managers have got slightly wrong, or the market shifted, and the prices come in sky high, and we've got to go in for an amendment to adjust something. First wave is always, unfortunately, try and, I was going to use the word beat up, but I'm going to use the word work with the supply chain to see where we can reduce some money. But more often than not, the real way is you've got to shave your scope or your area. So we do go back and look at those things, but it's incredibly difficult and very intense and stressful. So if you have those relationships with the local authorities and get those through early, and then you should just sail through planning in theory, and it's all relationships. Our whole industry is based around people, which is the amazing thing about it. So we sit back and you get the planning pushed through, and it should be relatively easy unless you get a curveball if you do it the right way. And then when we get into procurement, it's fine in theory. But sorry, I am going to add one extra point, which does drive me insane, and I kick back at this massively because I feel for our builders on how much they spend on tendering. So I don't like tender lists of 5. That is, the costs for you guys is significant. And then what we want from you, there's so much extra stuff. Yes, you get the benefit of the frameworks because you've done all that. But when you go out without a framework, you are the information some clients ask for. These are tier 1 contractors. Come on, this should be check, tick, gone. and let's just focus on the core things we want to see. But every client has stakeholders that want more and more and more information, and it just sucks the costs in your tendering exercise. So that's why I generally will only ever go to 3.
All I was going to add is, from a contractor point of view, a lot of projects that come to us have been through planning or are in planning by the time a contractor is brought on board. And for a lot of local authorities, they don't want to procure a contractor until they've got that certainty of planning. So then it's exactly as Tim described. Then when you get on board, something's got planning, then you kind of hoping the budget meets the scope, and if it doesn't, then you get into that. There's 2 things, isn't there? There's either a rescope or there's a rebudget, which is a challenge. And I would support sometimes the requirements, particularly 85-90% of what we do is through frameworks for exactly that reason, that there's a setup, there's competition that we know. You're generally one of 3, one of 4, rather than one of 6 or open market, which we wouldn't do, because it becomes a bit of a dart at a dartboard, and they can be huge, these tenders, and you wonder how many. Be interesting to know how much of it gets read versus what's asked for in the submission. So, but maybe don't tell me that.
Yeah, I think I'd say that'll probably send you west, Jane. I think if we do that. Wanted to bring Charley in here. You've been waiting very patiently, Charley. Thank you. We talked at the start about program slippage and the unrealistic programs that are really the root cause of everything. So we solved it. There we go. Root problem sorted. What are the kind of performance metrics, KPIs that can be brought in early to kind of identify those signs of slippage, and how can that be managed in your perspective?
I think, thanks, Tom. I think a couple of things I mentioned at the start about early contractor involvement and that sort of thing. What Sypro can do is really help facilitate those relationships across the board between clients, professional services, contracts, bring everyone into one roof, and Sypro can then work to make all those decisions a lot easier. Everyone's on the same page and everyone knows exactly where they are. So we can step in and maybe turn a hiccup, stop it becoming a catastrophe. So it's a real kind of like, quick, let's jump on this, let's get it sorted. In terms of that kind of monitoring and that history build and those KPIs we look at, we can then build in all that information through those contractual relationships, through the ECI or PCSA if you're using a JCT contract. And we can start then pulling out information on what are those causes, what's causing those slippages, what's causing a compensation event, what's causing an early warning and that kind of thing. And you can pull that through as customers and go, right, is it these particular subcontractors which are maybe causing us a bit of an issue? Is it this client who's changing their scope more often than not? It's these kind of delays which are going on. Where in the country we're working, the ground conditions are a problem there. You can pull all this information, start looking at it from a different scope, and get different analysis on it, and then going, right, on our next project, should we do something different? Should we try, we've got all this information, we've got all this data, we don't want to enter like a dashboard show-off competition. We can actually start using it and harnessing it and going, can we make some better decisions out of this? There's a lot of sort of show and tell for the clients that we've done this, this, and this. But we've got more contract information, more delay reasons than probably most people in the country. Certainly more than the NEC and the JCT, because they don't actually monitor this sort of stuff. So we're looking at going, right, where is the hold-ups coming from? What's going on? How can we help our customers like Willmott, Dixon, like Kier, who use our software and go, this is potentially where you're going to come unstuck later on. You can put some mitigations in process now and really work through that.
We talked about, moving on to the point about early engagement, we talked about it in the sense of procurement and tendering and how it helps there. But in terms of de-risking more complex projects, and we'll come to you, David, on this, but I'd love to hear Jane's views as a fellow contractor as well. How can that early engagement help with de-risking those more complex projects?
I'm glad you came back to me on this, because it is very much about that early engagement again. In the design and build approach now, and that we generally take across the industry, how can you not have early contractor engagement is a point I'd make. And too often, go back to your point as well about the planning process, Sypro is a fantastic piece of software, but we need to be planning for hitting planning on time and for managing the client's budget effectively far, far sooner. And too often, we encounter projects where maybe the design hasn't been developed in line with the budget, and that we haven't designed to a budget. And the earlier that we can get involved in terms of technically break down that design, support that design before it goes into planning, before we have, fixed 50% of the cost. And by having that earlier engagement, whoever you are contracting with in terms of adding that value in terms from a technical construction perspective around design, because we haven't really covered it much so far, but one of the other main causes to delays is around design and delays through the design and the design process. And we need to get away from this business as usual approach of VE. We need to at some point tackle that and tackle the fact that VE should not be business as usual anymore. And we develop a design, it goes in for planning. We know, post-Ukraine, hyperinflation, all the challenges we've seen across the industry, and then we get into this holding pattern of value engineering the scheme back. It's too late. One thing we've got at Kier, and we've just launched it this week actually up here at UKREiiF, is Kier 360, as in 360 degrees. So it's not much more to it than that. But something we have within Kier is over 700 engineers and architects within the business. So something we really believe we can bring at the front end is that proper engineering technical support, which helps unpack these designs, helps simplify designs, helps bring standardisation in to make sure that we are designing to cost at the start rather than post-planning. I'm sorry to keep making the point around early engagement, but it's about using the contractor to add that value early on rather than post-planning.
Jane, to the value engineering point, it's just another thing that adds to that ongoing sort of delays that we're talking about here today, isn't it, really?
Yes, absolutely. So it's exactly as David said. If you can avoid that and you're designing to a budget in the first place, then that's the ideal. I think the other piece is the engagement with our supply chain. So we bring in our supply chain, be it buildability workshops, alternative materials, specs that we can use that can influence, can either make the program, could simplify the program, could make it quicker, could avoid cost. So actually their expertise, our supply chain expertise, is critical as well. So, it's not just us, we have our own, but then we also leverage the people that we work with most of the time as well, because they're the ones that are on the ground that can really make the difference. But as David said, design as well. Design being as complete as it needs to be can also avoid delays once you get onto site. The Building Safety Act is beginning to help in some ways, because you have to have a more detailed design to go through the gateway. So that's a positive out of it. That means you're starting, you know exactly what you're doing, and you're not waiting for design while you're going, because that's one of the worst things that can happen. You get on site and you're still waiting for designs to come through, because there's always a keenness to start, isn't there? And I know you're saying trying to protect the procurement times, but the amount of times that we hear, tenders going back and going back and going back, but then when they do finally come out, the end date's still the end date. And that particularly happens around education because of terms, and people don't want to lose years. So that's a real classic, and we've seen it with another defence client recently where the tender's been delayed about 8 months, but when it's come out, the end date's still April 27, as it was last summer. So just need to do things quicker.
Can I just chip in on a VE point? VE is the wrong word. More often than not, it is cost rip. We are reducing the cost of the project. What we have always done, particularly for universities, etc., is you start a value engineering list in the true sense. You'll have things that, if we can afford it, we want to do this, this, and this. So you have a wish list. But what we often put out, and I'm not sure if this frustrates the contracting market or not, but we'll send them the VE list as well, and it's got the ups and the downs, true VE and reduction, if we get into trouble. But we want that, your view, initial view on pricing that, plus design fees, etc., to be able to implement it, and we can then look at those. And then if we've got a budgetary problem, we've got something to crack into straight away. But if we're under budget, we've got some good stuff to add in that might reduce OPEX costs, and that's a big chunk of it, what we need to look at.
So just talking more about some of the lessons learned from delayed projects that we've had in the past, and we'll speak to you on this one, Ben, to start off with, but again, feel free to jump in at any point, anyone else. From your perspective and the projects that you come across and work alongside, what are some of those lessons that have come from ones that have gone less than ideally?
Well, apart from what's already been covered in terms of the relationships, the early dialogue, I do, so the perspective from the local authority will be sometimes, why is, if this is what you end up being able to build, then why did you apply for that other thing there? But some of the discussion we've had around here sort of illuminates that. I think in terms of sort of drawing positive lessons from that, I think most, I'm going to sort of speak for most planning authorities, would be, they want projects to get through and get concluded quickly as well, because in terms of just managing caseload for your workforce, the longer every application is running, it means the more that every individual case officer has got 30, 40 cases on the go at a time. So quick resolution is a good thing for planning authorities as well. But if there could be a way that what comes in initially is closer to what can be approved, then and there's a greater not honesty, but maybe more directness about what's going to be supported by the planning authority, and being able to have that conversation really up front, that would be certainly to the planning authority's preference, because less time spent on sort of grinding through a scheme to argue this, that and the other to eventually get changes. So it's a variation of the same point, but I think if it, this is a discussion about getting to be able to construct, but there's other people out there submitting planning applications which are essentially speculative, not really any intention of delivering, and so they're in the mix as well. Any officer's caseload will have a mixture of those things, where it may just be a punt to say, can we get planning permission for this, and whether we sell it on or get it built, it's a separate question. Those are in the same caseload as projects that are absolutely wanting to get out on site with maybe a completion date, and so the dynamics of how the to and froing for a planning application, making amendments go, they're probably quite different for those two different client needs, but the planning service is geared up to also be able to deal with speculative. And I think a conversation like this, what I'll be taking away from this, taking back to Glasgow, is thinking for people such as yourselves that have got that end date and they've got it's not a speculative site valuation. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That's a totally fine thing. It's part of the planning system's role as well. But for the ones where they want to get end date for occupation, start date for construction, really up front, what would a good planning application look like to achieve that? And if you have that in mind, that's the kind of conversation that certainly our teams would be looking to have, and I would like to think a lot of planning authorities would want to have.
Karen, from a sort of procurement perspective, what are some of the things that you see on a day-to-day basis that you feel are the lessons that people should be learning from projects that are not going the way they should be?
I think there's many.
Yeah. We've only got about 10 minutes. So.
How long's my list? Come back to the planning conversation. I think that you're right in saying I think some of the requirements under the new Building Safety Act, if I've got that word right, is supporting. I think one of the big difficulties that we've experienced in projects, and just generally a concern within the sector really, is we've talked loads of conversations at UKREiiF about decarbonisation, about prioritising, doing the right thing with a building. You've got a building to build, you need the building to be built. How do we do it in the right way? How do we get approval for what might look on the face of it as additional cost up front? How are we taking account of life cycle costing? How are we making those decisions? Some of the worst delays to projects that we've seen are those that haven't had that early contractor involvement or any sort of supply chain involvement. They've gone for planning, we've got planning approval, that's great, let's procure a contractor. We're then coming to these decisions and thinking, we're going to have to make such catastrophic changes to this that we're going to have to go back to planning. Going back through the planning process is ultimately one of the worst things. I'm sure there's many others, but one of the worst things that could happen to a project programme, in having to basically get so far down the line to be right at the beginning again. I mean, the impact on the appointed contractor, the supply chains that are relying on that project going forward, and the people who are ultimately going to occupy that building or have a need of that building, and the client team behind that, is huge. And it's one of the biggest problems that can be faced in not doing that planning up front and not engaging the supply chain, I think. And the specification of that often then ends up in you're either going back and doing all of that again, you might not have an option, or our clients are being forced down a path of rehashing in a way a project to make it fit so it fits the boundaries of not having to go back to planning, but it's not actually doing the right thing. So you ended up with a building that, yeah, it's a building, it kind of serves a purpose, but it could have been so much more. And we could have had all of these initiatives in it that actually do drive the net zero plan and do meet all of these objectives of a council, where really you've got a building that's, nah, it's meh, for want of a better term.
Neither one thing nor the other. An unhappy compromise.
Exactly, yeah.
So we're conscious of time, so I just wanted to move on to a little point around, we talked about early engagement with contractors. What about this? The biggest challenge seems to be a lot of time is unrealistic client expectations. So how do we get the clients on board with more realistic programs? Because it seems that seems to be the root, well, not quite, maybe not like the root cause, but it seems to be something that's consistent coming out from what we're saying today. So Tim, your view on this?
So despite what I said at the start, my programs are not all rubbish. I do get sense checks. I engage very, very early. I've done this with you guys recently for something, and it's just, what's your thoughts? So, you know, are the periods all right? Have we got enough time? It's critical, the early engagement piece. I've tried it once to have a contractor come on board at feasibility, and they were like, no way, this is what you do at the start of a project. And they just weren't used to that, really front-end piece. But taking them on that journey was hugely beneficial because we got really good time slots in things. But I just wouldn't mind going back because one of the things that always gets me on delays in projects is actually, we might mess up the front end and design changes, delays in planning and all that fun stuff. We go on site. If you're lucky enough to get out of the ground okay, get a superstructure up okay, I often find that we reach a period on the site that we get to burnout. And I've been trying a new thing for some of the residential buildings that we put up, that it's like, I want a fresh set of legs on this now, please. You might keep some senior management, but I want a whole set of fresh legs because everyone's burnt out, tired. It may go on. Timeframes squeeze, and particularly in the public sector and universities, we get to that golden commissioning management zone, and that gets pinched and pinched and pinched. And what then happens is the end product has issues. We get to a point we've just got to take the building because we've got people moving in or students rocking up. So you've got to take it. But it is, it is just keeping it going and working with the clients. The clients are okay generally, as long as they know what's going on. And there was a little thing I picked up on the AI and tech, and Sypro is really good. We've utilised that. But there's other tech out there that can give accurate, updated program data. And I think if we could sort of deploy a bit more of that kind of mentality with people's phones and whatnot they've got on sites, we're all getting it. And the big thing for me is sharing it. Don't just keep it locked away, share it. Your problem's our problem, and our client's problem. And when we know, we can deal with it. When we don't know, that's when everything starts going a bit pear-shaped.
Do you want to jump in on that technology point there, Charlie?
Yeah, absolutely. The sharing part of it is crucial to any project delivery, and I think once you are working on the ground and everything like that, and you're out on the site, we often find with our experience that one of the major problems that everyone faces once they're on site is they've really messed with the contract effectively. I'm going to bang on about contracts. That's what I do, I'm afraid. But yeah, I work with Dr. Stuart Kings in Sypro. He was the original drafter of the NEC contract. He has a lot of hair, but he does pull it out. With the amount of people who amend contracts, it's the NEC contract's bloody good as it is, and then you get your legal teams coming in going, I want to change this, want to change that, want to change this. Exactly. But it does cause problems. It ties people up in knots, and then people are setting unrealistic time frames, all that sort of thing going in. People trip up on it. Our software helps you stop tripping up, but sometimes they do set up to fail. If things aren't agreed, amongst the team, it goes through our system. We can't argue back. We'll do whatever you want, but we are sitting there going, you could have just left it as it is. This would have been so much easier. It would have run so much more smoothly. But
I think there's a lot of conversation around planning today, and the challenges planning we currently face with planning, particularly with the Building Safety Act also kick in as well, and the gateways. And I agree with the point you made. We're very good at monitoring and reporting on what we can see, what we can touch and see. So, are we doing 18, 20 CFA piles a day? Has the have we come out of the ground on time? Have we topped the frame out on time? What we're not collectively as good at doing, and I mean, and I'd put main contractors in that group as well sometimes, as well as client teams, is monitoring what isn't as visible. So design and procurement, and we need to be far better, I think, collectively at holding design to program and procurement in the same way we do as what we physically can see on site, what we can touch and feel, because inherently, with stating the obvious, design and procurement will always delay or impact what happens on site, and I think that's on us as well. We need to be far more transparent in terms of focused on keeping design to program. I know I keep bringing up design, but design and procurement to program, and equally. We need to support our clients to make decisions on time, because two of the most important values a really good client will have is to make decisions on time and to pay you on time. And so I think, no, we'd ask for much. So having that rigour, and I said a point that I think that's beholden on all of us, particularly the main contractors, about having that same rigorous approach to driving the programme around design and procurement, as well as when we get to site. And having the same focus, and that's again where Sypro is really good in terms of contract management, is having that same rigorous, transparent focus.
That accountability point's really important, isn't it, Jane? That making sure that those the contractors are holding themselves to account alongside everybody else.
Yes, absolutely, and there can be many delays in pre-construction that aren't around planning through other areas, and it's something that we try and track to look for key trends. Unfortunately, there's not a silver bullet of when you put it all on the table to say, oh, that's the issue, but there's no doubt design is one of those. And often when we're brought in, sometimes we're keeping the design team, and it might be a new design team to the contractor, but because they might be the customer's design team, and there's things that you need to work through there, or you might be introducing a new design team because they've asked you to appoint your own design team, and there's again going to be some transfer because one architect stage 3 probably isn't another architect stage 3, and they've all got different opinions and things that are missing or not missing, and who likes drawing a detail and who doesn't. So all of those things, and of course pre-construction, I'm sure as Dave said, it can get very expensive for a contractor as well, compared to what customers often pay, and that's never great if you're starting by the time you get to site. It's normally a slightly different team, but you have got people involved that can be a bit weary of the project before they get out there, because what they want to do is get up and start seeing things moving. So, but the contracts that you mentioned as well, that's interesting, because the amount of times that we get, a project in, and it's an NEC or a JCT with 22 pages of amends. That does slow things down, and it can be tricky to sort of work through that. So it's interesting to know how kind of good the standard contract is, because we very rarely see a standard contract, do we, David? I don't think. No.
We don't have one on our system.
Bedford, with a quick point to finish off.
Just a very little point. The point there about one architect, stage 3 being different than others. It may sound a bit bizarre, but the planning system as it's set up doesn't talk in terms of stage 0, 1, 2, 3. But one of the things we're doing in Glasgow with our planning improvement plan is looking at that and looking at how can we just sink into that, so that what the planners are asking for in terms of level of detail translates into the REBA stages. And it might sound quite a simple thing. It just so happens that our improvement lead has a background in the sort of project development and design team leader, was saying, why aren't you doing this? This is a common level of detail, and that's the kind of thing that I think can just help smooth out the stages, so that it's all sort of interfacing across the different systems. So just a wee point there.
No, thank you very much. And then we'll definitely have another hour and a half session just talking purely about the planning system. And I imagine there's been at least several of those already this week. So thank you very much, guys, for your contributions today. And this was the first panel we've done this week that hasn't mentioned the Procurement Act. So well done. It's a very, very impressive to get through without mentioning that. So thank you very much for your time and attendance at the table. And thank you, everyone who's managed to come in. We've actually had a fairly decent crowd for this slot on a Thursday. So thank you very much for your time and your attendance in Pagabo Live today. And enjoy the rest of UKREiiF, what we've got left of it. Thank you.
Thank you.